Alex always took the long route home after work, preferring the quiet, winding path that led past the old graveyard. It was a place shrouded in eerie legends, the kind that teenagers dared each other to investigate on moonless nights. But Alex, a practical man, dismissed such stories as superstitious nonsense until the night he heard the singing. The first time, it was barely audible. A faint melody drifted through the air, carried on the cool breeze. Alex paused, his heart skipping a beat. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, a lilting tune that seemed to call out to him. He shook his head, chuckling nervously. Probably the wind, he muttered, and quickened his pace. But the melody followed him. Each step he took seemed to amplify the sound, growing louder and more distinct. By the time he reached the end of the graveyard, the singing was unmistakable. It was no longer a vague tune, but a chorus of voices harmonizing in a language he didn't understand. Unease prickled his skin, and he broke into a jog, determined to put as much distance as possible between himself and the graves. That night, Alex dreamed of the graveyard. In his dream, the tombstones glowed with an unnatural light, and ghostly figures swayed in time to the haunting melody. When he woke, his heart was racing, and the tune was still ringing in his ears. The next evening, curiosity got the better of him. He told himself it was ridiculous to be afraid of an old cemetery. With a flashlight in hand, Alex returned to the graveyard, determined to prove that the singing was just a figment of his imagination. The graveyard was eerily silent when he arrived, the kind of silence that seemed to absorb all sound. The air was heavy, and the moon cast long shadows across the moss-covered tombstones. Alex's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating names and dates etched into stone. He wandered deeper into the cemetery, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. And then he heard it again. The singing began as a soft hum, almost imperceptible. It grew louder with each step he took, the voices weaving together in an otherworldly harmony. Alex's breath hitched. The sound was coming from the heart of the graveyard. He followed the melody, his flashlight trembling in his hand. As he rounded a corner, he froze. A group of spectral figures stood in a circle around a massive oak tree. They were translucent, their forms shimmering like mist in the moonlight. They swayed to the rhythm of the song, their faces hidden beneath hooded cloaks. The singing filled the air, resonating deep in Alex's chest. He wanted to run, to scream, but his body refused to obey. He was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the ghostly figures. One of them turned, and Alex's breath caught in his throat. The figure's face was a hollow void, an abyss of darkness that seemed to pull at his very soul. "Leave," the figure whispered, its voice cutting through the melody like a blade. The other figures stopped singing and turned to face him. Their hollow faces stared at him, and Alex felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. It rolled across the ground, its beam illuminating the skeletal hand of a figure reaching toward him. Alex turned and ran, his heart pounding in his ears. The singing resumed, louder and more chaotic, the melody twisting into a cacophony of wails and screams. When he burst out of the graveyard, the noise stopped abruptly. He collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for air. The night was silent once more, but the image of the hollow faces was burned into his mind. Over the next few days, Alex tried to convince himself that it had all been a hallucination. But the singing began to follow him, creeping into his dreams and echoing in the quiet moments of his day. He avoided the graveyard, taking a longer route home, but the melody seemed to find him no matter where he went. Desperate for answers, Alex visited the town's library to research the graveyard's history. He discovered that it was built on the site of an ancient burial ground, a place where a cult had performed rituals to summon spirits from the beyond. The cult had been eradicated centuries ago, but whispers of their dark practices lingered in local folklore. One name stood out in his research: the Singing Circle. According to legend, the cult's most powerful ritual involved a chorus of voices calling forth the dead. Those who heard the singing were said to be marked, drawn inexorably into the graveyard to join the spectral choir. Alex's hands trembled as he closed the book. He was marked. The realization sent a wave of panic through him, but it also steeled his resolve. He couldn't live the rest of his life in fear. He needed to confront the spirits and put an end to the haunting. That night, armed with a bag of salt, a Bible, and a small iron dagger he'd bought from an antique shop, Alex returned to the graveyard. The air was colder than before, and the